All right, welcome back to the Money Wisdom Podcast, powered by Johnson Bernetti. My name is Jake Dozer. Joining me as always is my partner in crime up in the Boston area, Nick Colantuono. Both of us are certified financial planners and advisors on the team at Johnson Bernetti. We're looking forward to the question that we have in front of us today. And that question is this: my son is very smart, but for some reason, very bad with managing money. Any parents out there can probably relate here. He's 45 and just can't seem to hold down a job or get his life together in general. I'm a little worried about what will happen if I die and leave him a couple $1,000,000, but I wouldn't want to give it to anyone else. How should I handle this? Well, first and foremost, let's get the housekeeping items out of the way. What a good problem to have. However, with that being said, and all kidding aside, Nick, what is your first piece of advice to this listener that's written in this question for us today?
Well, first of all, it's a fantastic question, and it's a question that we get all too often because the reality of it, Jake, and you know this as well as I do, a lot of people out there just aren't very good at managing money. Yet there's this expectation that they should be. Meanwhile, you know, you work a long career. It might be in healthcare. You might be a teacher. You might be a nurse. You might be a mechanic, whatever it is. And then you retire or you inherit money, and there's just this expectation that you should know how to do this on your own. So oftentimes we're having questions when it comes to these legacy planning conversations. And I think the most important thing is to just know the differences between how it goes when you leave money, whether it's through a beneficiary designation or whether it's through a will, versus when you do the more complex, you know, kind of more sophisticated type planning where we get into the worlds of trusts and those sorts of things. So why don't you break that down for us? Tell us the I guess the implications of just leaving money behind, whether it's a will or a beneficiary designation, and the difference when you then get into that trust planning type of scenario.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Nick. Folks have to understand what are the ramifications. Know the cards that you're dealt so that you can understand how to play your hand best. And so to that end, as Nick mentioned, you can just simply have a beneficiary on an account. Now, depending on the type of account that these assets are held in, has a huge ramification. You know, for instance, if somebody leaves $2 million in the bank with a simple beneficiary, well, then it's very straightforward. That beneficiary is getting that money outside, barring some unforeseen law change. They're not going to pay taxes on that money, at least from an income tax perspective. Depending on the state in which you live is going to dictate whether an inheritance or gift tax would be applied. So for instance, $2 million being left in Massachusetts is going to be a very different situation than here in Connecticut. In Connecticut, we're not looking at any taxes. In Massachusetts, an inheritance or estate tax might be at play there. But back to the account that the money is being left in, beneficiary, you're getting the money. They're coming in, making a death claim, presenting identification, presenting a death certificate, and that's kind of it. Now, the other option is an account doesn't have a beneficiary. Obviously, that is a headache and a half for the recipient. Now that money has to wait for the probate court to dictate how that money gets delineated based on the state's next of kin rules. Or let's say the other spectrum, there's a beneficiary on an IRA or a 401k. Well, that money is going to have to travel from the decedent, the person who passed away, into an inherited IRA, at which point the beneficiary can either take a lump sum distribution, which is going to be, of course, subject to income tax because it's a traditional pre-tax retirement account, or they're going to take a distribution over up to 10 years. That's the new IRS rule as of the time of this recording, where you can stretch those payments out. So needless to say, just the account in which that money is held, let alone how the beneficiary status is written or lack thereof, if there's no beneficiary, it just goes to an estate. That's going to have a huge implication. And so that's the first thing is you have to make an educated, informed decision based on how the account is titled and labeled. And then furthermore, you have to be asking yourself, you know, in this person's situation, it seems like the listener's concern is that this person is not going to use this money wisely. And so we have to be concerned about, okay, if this is inherited money, does that mean we're going to get taxed to death? You know, income taxes, state taxes are real. And that money could easily get cut in half through taxes, as opposed to stretching that money out. And so, Nick, what are some of the things commonly that people can take proactive steps on, not necessarily yet from the estate planning perspective, but
Sure.
from a way to drive taxes down? What can this person who currently owns these assets do to help with that?
Well, again, just making sure your beneficiaries are properly updated. The rule that you mentioned as far as those 10-year distributions, that does not apply if you leave money to someone who is either your surviving spouse or someone who is within 10 years of age of you. So if you do want to maximize the ability to stretch distributions, and you hate to think of like gaming the system, if you will, but there are ways where you can stretch those dollars, even though maybe the beneficiary on the account isn't necessarily the actual be all and end all beneficiary that you want to have that money left to. But from the sake of pen to paper, everyone should just be taking a second look at their beneficiary designations. That's the easiest way to just accomplish, okay, when I die, who gets this money, particularly with retirement accounts, bank accounts, things like that. Now, furthermore, when you get into the more complex or the estate planning pieces, I always encourage folks, at a minimum, everyone should have a will. The reason is, if you pass without a will, everything you own goes through the probate process. Keep in mind, having a will does not does not mean that your assets don't go through probate, but a probate court will look at a well-written will and say, okay, this is what their wishes were. They said when they die, this is who gets what. So at the end of the day, that's all a will does. It just says when I die, this is who gets what. A trust, furthermore, can spell out protection around that money. It can not only say when I die, this is who gets X, but it can also spell out the circumstances, the timing, the amount of money, right? The reasoning for which that person can have access to that money. So in a situation like this one, if this money is being left outside of retirement accounts where beneficiary designations, kind of are the be all and end all, if this money's left outside of retirement accounts, some serious trust planning should be done. Because if the concern here is, well, look, my son is very smart, right? But he's bad at managing money. Well, maybe he tries to outsmart himself sometimes when it comes to the management of that money. And, you don't want to all of a sudden have a windfall of money going to someone who could potentially get taken advantage of, or someone who is not good at managing money. And next thing you know, that money could be going to the wrong places. So having just some basic trust planning in place, saying, okay, I want my money to go to my son. He's very intelligent, but I don't want it to go to him all at once.
Right.
When, all of a sudden he just goes and, blows it on something. Not that he would, but again, I think that's where some very basic trust planning can just go a very, very long way for this client in particular, whose biggest concern is, I want to leave it to my son. I just don't really trust him to be a proper steward of it for, next generation or even for their own well-being.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Nick. It starts with understanding where are we at, what type of account is this money held in, and what's the probate process, what's the beneficiary process, what is the recipient, regardless of the proactive planning that I do, what are they looking at? Number two, it's identifying, hey, you probably need to involve an estate planning attorney. If you don't have one, be sure to loop us in. We'd be happy to recommend one within your area. And then it starts number three. I think it comes down to a frank conversation. Before someone passes away, really much prior, 60s and 70s, involving your children or beneficiaries to some extent, at minimum, informing them, this is the type of money that you might be coming into. I understand that conversation is uncomfortable, but it's better to be equipped and uncomfortable than totally comfortable and your family is in the dark with a headache. And the last thing you want somebody to have to worry about when they're grieving your loss is having to figure out how to pick up the financial pieces. And so to that end, thinking about proactive conversations with your family, proactive planning with an estate planning attorney, proactive tax-related planning, thinking about things like Roth conversions, driving that dollar down so that the money that goes to your beneficiaries is not a tax burden on them from an inheritance perspective, a gift perspective, and an income perspective. And making sure that all this money is done in concert, balancing both the benefit to the beneficiary and also the benefit to the person who owns the assets now. All of these things need to be acting in one accord. And so if that's something that would be of benefit to you where we can help, we'd be happy to do so. Maybe the best first step for you is to come into one of of the complimentary workshops that we do around a dinner table at a local restaurant near you. Nick and I are speaking at those things all the time. If you're interested in signing up for something like that, simply text the word workshop to 800-757-0436. That information is in the show notes below. If today's conversation was helpful for you, be sure to give our content a like. Be sure to share it with someone else that might be of interest in it, and follow. And we'll see you next time on the Money Wisdom Podcast.
Investment advisory services offered through JB Capital LLC. Insurance products offered through JN Financial LLC.